Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are we all doing today? And I welcome back all of you to another Chris Chan Quickie reading, where tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we now have to explore Chris's extremely unfounded, unelaborated, complexing, confusing, unrealistic, unsolicited, completely unfathomable approaches to the world of science. Now, without further ado, let's get started. I had no other clever intro for this, so let's just get to it, shall we? Here we go. Science is the systematic study of the natural world through observation and experimentation. Science can be divided into pure science, which studies natural phenomena, and applied science, which finds practical uses for said phenomena. Chris has an on-off history with science, though it is mostly off. His view on science, nature, and technology is utterly warped. He has lost touch with the times and thinks science is much more ahead in certain fields than it actually is, probably due to him getting all his information through fictional media. He has mixed up real science, pop science, pseudo-science, and other things he has learned from media and enablers to create a very distorted view of nature. Furthermore, Chris struggles with mathematics and numerical reasoning despite boasting otherwise. I mean, your basis for how adept Chris is at science will ultimately depend on whether or not you view the ideas of Chris's theoretical approach to science regarding the dimensional merge is the fact that he literally just drew it on a McDonald's napkin. With the idea that 1218... Well, actually, let's just view this properly, shall we? So, the logic is that 1218, this Earth, is 51% is surviving, with 41% dying, and there's a somewhat of an 8% margin of error. Let's just put aside the fact that that seems a little too accurate to be taken seriously, or the fact that C197, or 61.25, I think, has a 51% of surviving, which 38 points... I'm already losing track of this already, we've just started. So apparently 38.75% of C197's population is going to survive, with 38.75, half of them being OCs, or original characters, with once again there being another 8% margin of error. Regular people are referred as 51% of surviving. We have no idea if this accounts for both sides of the cut of the dimensional merge, with once again another 8% margin of error, with 41% of people going to die. So let's just do a quick little math, shall we? If we're assuming that 41% on both sides of the coin are going to die, then that means there's going to be roughly a 102% chance that people are going to survive, which is going to overfill the quota. But if we're assuming there is going to be an 8% margin of error, it still means that there's the potential for the fact that more people, or slightly more people, are going to survive, probably more than anyone anticipated, compared to those who are eventually going to snuff the lid. Bear in mind, with what counts as an OC, could immediately attest to such things as whether or not the body count is going to rise here and there from C197. We know it won't, but there's that. And also, best outcome of 1218 is that 59% survive, and of C197, 49% people will die. So it means that... Are you getting all this? Because this is going to be on the test, and well, I think, well, let's just put that behind us, because it doesn't say anything, and it doesn't give us... It gives us an idea that Chris is so completely off the... I wonder exactly who found this napkin, or whether or not Chris just took it home with him. His ego also causes him to reject scientific findings, such as when he rejected the fact that Asperger's syndrome and high-functioning autism are one and the same. I've talked about this before, and I still maintain the idea is that Chris secretly thoroughly knows this, but decides he wants to save face and say horrible things about people with Asperger's for no real reason whatsoever. I mean, you can't fall back on the idea that people with Asperger's are stealing the spotlight from autistic people. It's a concept that is ridiculous on every single face of the earth. So, no. Chris on science itself. Fated moments override numbers. Chris on his views on established scientific data and deciding to just throw it completely out of the window. Chris comes from a scientific background on his father's side. Bob was a scientific man. He worked as a GE engineer for a large part of his life. He wanted Chris to be into science too. So he had set up a small workshop where he and young Chris would tinker around. Chris's parental half-siblings both had STEM doctorates, with one in particular having made a career as an orthomorphologist, and Chris himself has an applied science associate's degree in CAD. Alas, none of this got Chris deeply interested in science. Which, I know like a little bit of a small tangent here, is that even though there isn't too much of like a scientific background in like my family, that doesn't mean to say, however, that my brother hasn't because my brother is, well, basically that's what he's been working towards ever since 2016, is that he has high aspirations to be a doctor professor. In fact, he is currently in his last year of his biochemistry degree at the University of Dundee, and the idea is that he's got an exam to take at the end of this academic year, and now he's going to be moving on to do a master's degree the next year. And I think it's like 2 years he has to study this in Dundee before he can actually gain his MA, and then he's got to go through like a year or two of studying for a doctorate. And whether or not my brother wants to actually continue his studies at Dundee, or maybe at a different university. I don't know if it's like the University of Sheffield, or if it's the University of or UCL, the University College London, has a very substantial base, or maybe even he could even go to Silicon Valley, or even go study in the US, because stem cell research is absolutely what my brother's talked exclusively about for the last few years, including adult neurogenesis, basically the building blocks to how human beings store memory and how it can be programmed through chemicals, nerves, and specifically the lobes that direct to other parts of the body through the central nervous systems, and how it also connects to all the cerebrals and all the membranes of the brain, from the cerebellum to the amygdala. And well, basically, it's all incredibly fascinating. And I know I've like not really thought, and as well, my sister is actually currently studying for a master's degree in art history, and even though I might seem a little bit like the odd one out when it comes to this sort of thing, it doesn't mean to say that actually pursuing a Master's of Arts degree was not necessarily outside of my field of interest. I just kind of decided just to sort of like explore a little bit of the world, or to try and like learn a bit more through the world through just trying to be like a normal person, I suppose. Even though normal is a concept that is just completely over the hill, I suppose. But yeah, I do appreciate the fact that they went out of their way to say that Bob did come from a very Chris came up with a good parental figure who absolutely wanted, again, at the best of times, I think Bob just wanted the best for his son, as well he did for the rest of his children. But again, Chris had no real desire or interest, which is just kind of sad. It was sad that, dreams didn't come true in that workshop. Alas. Anyway, back to reality. Chris has stated his opinions on science in his OkCupid questionnaire. He said all types of science are interesting to him, though he finds conversations about science to be boring and annoying. Oh. He claims to put equal weight in science and faith, and enjoys finding out how things work. To my money, ladies and gentlemen, Science and Faith, the still most popular album by The Script. But let's stay on script, shall we? And again, to the people who care, I love that album anyway. For the first time, ooh, 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 ooh. Sorry. All these, however, should be taken with a grain of salt, since he was ready to do anything, including lying, to obtain China. Yeah, he would do anything on Earth, but he would also do that. I'm going to stop quoting songs right now, because literally I could just keep that up all day. Dear me. It's like potmaster, except we're talking about Chris. His actual views on pure science are probably low or non-existent since he slept through high school. He may have a positive opinion on computer science due to him being hooked on computers since a very young age. Unsurprisingly, Chris is not interested in engineering. All his engineering marvels are shitty duct tape and Lego creations that a child could also make. Also, a device in which he had an iPhone and 2 iPod touches. Not bad, I suppose, but don't bother taking a patent out on those things anytime soon. iPod touches have been defunct since 2019, sadly. Pure science. Physics. There are multiple things that are horribly wrong in Sonichu comics, including a lack of regard for the laws of physics. Documenting all these would be impossible since each page of the comic has some law being broken. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, when I was studying animation at university, one of the things that any good animator would need to know is a great concept on physics, because you had to somehow communicate to the viewer that whether an action was being taken, that it's got to follow a certain trajectory, and even the motion of it had to architect its way into such a manner that the viewer can distinguish how much force there is behind a punch, a jump, or a throw of any description. And with the amount of tweening that usually goes on in these sorts of things, because it's not exactly out of the realm of possibility that any good animator should always be prepared to consider the physical weight of whatever action they produce. However, I think it's even more so in the case of comic books, because there are fewer moving pieces in a comic book than there would be in a piece of animation. So therefore, you would have to make the impact somewhat more impactful with fewer frames. Well, only really one frame, to be honest. And of course, this is something that Chris might have thought about at one point, but they're not communicated very well owing to scale, poor artwork, poor drawing, disembodied limbs and stuff, and all the rest of it. Stuff that doesn't communicate anything except what it's blatantly supposed to be. Which you could say is all that's required, but, well, it's in theory, but in execution it leaves a lot to be desired. Let's just put it like that. All kinds of wacky things happen in the comics, such as light behaving to the wishes of the great director Chandler. Velocity and acceleration are as random as the lottery. Friction becomes fiction. I like the puns they put here. These are actually quite clever. And hypothetical concepts such as parallel dimensions and portals are everyday occurrences that break basically the molecular of a fictional universe somehow. Normally, these discrepancies from reality could be written off as science fiction, but Chris thinks all of this really happened in some other dimension, and it can be considered as a critique of his scientific knowledge. While Sonichu's conversion, I learned it from a passing Porygon. I didn't realize Porygon had the ability to do that, but whatever. In real life, since Chris has no real powers, bear that in mind, he has to play by the rules of physics, but he maintains an unbending belief in unproven concepts. Most of these beliefs can be traced back to fictional media he likes, such as Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Futurama for the multiple dimensions, and Rick and Morty to prove that there are other people who can traverse dimensions. Chris again attempted to bend the laws of physics in February 2021. Oh god, here it comes. Having plans to use piezoelectricity on his quartz crystals in order to open up a portal to complete the dimensional merge. Chris has discussed this with Kyle, to which he explains to Chris why this wouldn't work and how the article that he is citing does not provide evidence of his claims. Knowing Chris's Lipitor addiction, well, mostly for different reasons, I'm surprised that it would probably just give Chris a heart attack if he did something like that. Oh, and by the way, in case you're wondering, like, where the sun is and why, if we could assume the sun is meant to be somewhere like in like this direction, somewhere like shining down on him, then why is like the shadow like overcoming like the arches of Wild Sonichu's feet. It gives the idea. So if we're meant to believe that the sun is like maybe slightly on top of Wild Sonichu, and why the shadow isn't so thick before, then why would there be shading here? Like, shadows are not really known to have shadings. They usually operate on opacity logics, and well, it should just sort of stop at one point. Again, these are the sorts of things you probably need to refresh your memories on, ladies and gentlemen, because I've talked about like the problems with Chris's writing before, but this is like another matter entirely. Something that's very, very difficult to get away from. Also, there's the aspect of dimensions for this road. I'm getting ahead of myself. Chemistry. Chris had 2 gal pals as partners in his chemistry lab. Not much else is known on his views of chemistry, though he probably has low opinions about it due to the rote nature of chemistry and him being a lazy bum. Biology. Chris's history with biology is well documented due to him torturing his body by ramming all sorts of things in holes where they don't belong, while also torturing biologists by making ungodly anatomical drawings of electric hedgehog Pokemon and shitty morphological drawings of humans. Case in point, Paddy-chan Sonichu. Or is it Paddy-chan Rosechu or something? I don't know. Applied science. Computer science. Out of all the sciences, Chris is probably the best at computer science. Like most people born during or after the 1980s, he has been around computers since his childhood. He took some computer upgrade classes in PVCC, and he bragged to Casey's dad that he's technologically inclined. He coded most of his websites by hand using text editors, that's actually quite impressive, as opposed to using purpose-built HTML editors that do the heavy work for him. Oh. He knows a bit about older computers like the Commodore 64 due to his age and nostalgia. Engineering. Bob tried to get Chris interested in engineering since Chris was young, but to no avail. Though Chris has made a few inventions, such as a case for holding 2 Apple products and a case for holding Pokemon cards. The raw materials Chris uses are limited to Crayola model magic, Legos, and duct tape. Due to his new interest in cosplaying, he has started making some accessories to go along with the costume. When he cosplayed as Chris from Pokemon Crystal for BronyCon 2019, he tried to make a Pokegear. Instead of using proper professional materials, he opted to use Crayola model magic. Never mind. Model medicine. Medicine is a field applied to human biology, which helps in keeping a person's health in check. Chris has incredibly poor both mental and physical health, as well as social health. Another problem he creates is by self-medicating and relying on unlicensed people and persons. He did go to a doctor in occasion for his physical health checkups, but refused to go to a proper mental health counsellor and went to his church's pastoral counsellor instead. Recently, he has put in an effort to improve in all fields, but nowhere near what is required to make him a fully functional human being. Then, of course, there's the realm of psychology, which I did a video of previously, so if you do want to know what I think about Chris's approach to mental health care, then you're more than free to do so. God, it was at least like nearly 5 weeks ago since I made that. Where does the time fly? Pseudo-science. Astrology. Chris has almost never spoken about astrology, though he has talked about astrology's older sibling, astrology, which Chris has for a long time told others about his and his creation zodiac signs, to those who care, I suppose, proving he has some belief in it. He has mentioned in an IRC chat that he reads his horoscope daily, and in his February 2012 Facebook posts, posted in detail about his interpretation of his horoscope. In his OkCupid questionnaire, he considered astrology to be a legitimate science, because of course he did. Magic. Chris has shown to have a belief in magic many times. The most notable example is the belief that he had the power to curse people. To what end, ladies and gentlemen, I have no idea. As to whether any of these things worked, I have no idea either. again, because I live in the real world, I don't believe in magic. I believe friendship is probably magic, but that's about as far as my perceptions of magic are willing to go. Magic stones. A subset of his beliefs in magic, Chris has started purchasing and wearing various semi-precious stones which supposedly mentally calm and heal him. Supposedly is a great point. Well, considering the last video Chris has released where he somehow claimed that Hasbro was in cahoots with the Russians to make My Little Pony Gen 5 just because Chris doesn't like that show, you can only suggest as well as I do as to what help these useless bits of rock have actually done for him. He also purchased an $80 water bottle with some rocks in it which also help him accomplish the same, which is absolutely sod all. Subliminal frequency self-help audio. Here we go. Subliminal frequency hypnosis videos are sets of audio on YouTube consisting of binaural beats, claiming to help listeners do things such as reduce body odor, doesn't work, turn a penis into a vagina, doesn't work, and make your ass fatter and stomach thinner, without having to do any actual work, designed for gullible idiots who literally would believe anything they're told to get out of the subsequent horror and trials of having actually to do of anything that required any legitimate effort. All of which are claims without any sort of real evidence to their effectiveness, proven, medical, or otherwise. Chris started watching these, or rather listened to these in 2016, in an attempt to speed up his gender transition. This culminated in Chris slicing his taint open because he believed that watching or listening to these videos caused a vagina to grow inside him. Despite risking his health from doing so, he continued to follow them. This time in an attempt to develop psychic powers. Of all the videos he's watched, only the ass fattening one has truly worked, and not through its own means. Way to go, Chris. Numerology. Chris has seemed to develop a fixation towards numerology, which became especially prevalent in several jail letters. Chris has on several occasions written the penultimate digit in the year 2022 backwards, so that the 2s resemble a heart. Okay, I suppose that's just like a fun little quirk, I suppose. I will admit I do have a little bit of like a fascination with numbers, but it's not probably not for the same reasons Chris does. You know, they probably would have, if I applied for Number Wang back in 2006, I pretty much would have won every single show. 2022, that's Number Wang. Mathematics. I excelled in Math 2 for the love of God. Mathematics, math or maths for short, is the study of quantity, numbers, and space. As with many autistics, Chris displays a fascination with numbers, but despite his claimed honor roll status, he has a weak grasp on the subject. There are countless examples of his mathematical errors, including basic arithmetical errors, as well as quantity, measurement, weight, and time. Chris has stated on at least one occasion that his math education goes all the way to college trigonometry, which shows that at some point he's also learned at least some college-level algebra and geometry, as they are both prerequisites to a typical trigonometry course. He has bragged to Julie about how he's a pretty good math genius. He claimed he received A's in his math classes. However, he hasn't used his supposed talent to his advantage by getting a job in a technical field. On this Wikipedia page, he cited his mathematical talent as proof he should have received an award at graduation. In Mumble Chat number 2, he said he got into a car crash while doing math in his head. Well, to be honest, I think we could all argue that it was all Chris's own fault, because if you're not 100% focused on what you're doing while driving, you shouldn't be behind the wheel. Simple as that. Arithmetic. Quickville's currency is made up of C quarters and W quarters. According to the Sonichu canon, 10 C quarters make up a single W quarter, which makes no sense. A quarter is 1/4 of its respective unit. When a clerk told Chris he was $2 short... Oh god, I hate this story so much. When Chris told he was $2 short of affording his junk food, he was left dumbfounded as to what he should do. Another customer in line gave Chris $2 to make up the deficit, and instead of handing it over to the clerk to pay off his debt, Chris simply took that money, the food, and left the store over everyone's protests. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, that was a real thing that happened. According to Chris, if he lived in Equestria, he'd be 1,050 years old, because 1 year in Equestria is equal to 30 Earth years, while Nightstar is 19 years old in human years, but 570 in pony years. Because Chris has this fixation for his birth date, he decided to give her the birth date 27th or 24th of February 1982, which is apparently pony year 967. Only checking after he's made his statement, Chris did the math to confirm this. In a later Facebook post, Chris stated that 30 out of 365.25 Earth days is equal to 11 Earth days for each birthday. In reality, 30 divided by 365.25 is approximately 8 hundredths. Even more pathetic is how he wrote the quotient as divided 30 by 365 instead of the other way around, and still got it wrong, as 365.25 divided by 30 is equal to 12.175, which cannot be rounded down to 11. In his flawed math, though, he had found that her actual birth date in pony years should be the 19th of February 1939. You know, for those who care. I suppose. I could almost sum up this entire thing by saying that, to those who care, I suppose. In Sonichu issue 10, the 4centgarbage.com tower collapses, with 1,500 people in it. According to Chris, 500 were perfectly unharmed, 250 were too drunk to escape on their own, 125 of these drunk trolls managed to get out alive with help of the sober trolls, while 125 of the drunk trolls were hurt, injured or killed. 125 sober trolls were hurt, injured or killed, 250 were injured, 150 were safe but hurt, and 100 were killed. Not only are we left in the dark about what happened to the 125 drunk troll casualties, but this total also only accounts for 1,375 people. Maybe the 125 just decided not to turn up for work that day or something, I don't know. Estimation and measurement. When exercising by lifting 2 boxes of 12-pack lemonade, he estimated that 4.26 litres of lemonade he was lifting weighed about 50 pounds, when in fact it weighed less than 10. In the chair lifting video, Chris claimed the chair he was lifting weighed a grand number of pounds, and owing to the actual Chris's posture and his technique, it probably would have crushed Chris's spine if it was any more pounds heavier, owing to how he was carrying it. Chris repeatedly claims to have D-cup breasts in his breast massage video. Chris measures his chest and underbust as 44 and 40 inches respectively, and says that they make him a D-cup. In reality, he is a B-cup. Also, the conventional method for breast measurement does not work for trans women, mainly because of chest girth, so Chris is actually closer to an A-cup. Yeah. In the infamous father call, Chris seemed to believe a doghouse made of plastic and wood weighed 5 to 10 tons, and was heavier than any tombstone, which tend to weigh an average of 80 pounds. Now, to be fair, you could say weighed more than any tombstone was meant to be metaphorical, but apparently the wiki seems to think he was being literal, but we'll let him off, I suppose. Essentially, Chris believes that plastic and wood would weigh more than solid stone. I'm not entirely sure if I agree. That was like if Chris was just trying to make a metaphor with that, but it's a bit difficult to determine with Chris, so you know what I mean? After walking 8 miles to and from the post office, Chris vastly underestimated the entire journey to have only been around 2 miles. Yes, well, this could just be attributed to the fact that Chris just, lied to people, as Chris is wont to do. Chris has tried to describe a number of everyday things like love and respect using all kinds of scales and numbers. His most famous example, the heart level, measures his emotional state. Another example, the scale of respect, is meant to be used to measure Chris's respect for certain individuals. In one of Chris's early maps of Quickville, the dimensions of its sectors/divisions are clearly out of scale. Even with Chris's reassurance that his CAD skills are at play, it's pretty easy for even a child to point out the errors in his judgment. I mean, again, we could take a look at this just to give a short little example. Let me put there we go. This is a map locating their house in the city of relations, which apparently this is meant to... Is it this is meant to equate to a quarter of a mile, or is it this space? Chris probably should have just... I don't know. So, well, okay, he measures it, he does it like this, but again, you can see these are obviously like... This is like all over the place. So is the city here and the 10 miles diameter, but what is it? I mean, this are meant to be like subdivisional areas, but what is this meant to be? Is it meant to be on this side of the line, or is it just meant to be here? So did Chris ever like look at a map before? I mean, we know he probably fell asleep during science classes, but did Chris ever do like geography classes? Listen, I studied geography for 3 years, from the age of 12 till the end of my year at 14. And even I could probably have told you that, again, just pick up a map and just, come on, you got to look at this a little bit better. I've known people from school who went on to study geography full time, and you got to be kidding me. Is this the best that Chris could come up with? Shame on you, Chris, because all people who study geography the worldwide are just like bashing their heads against the wall for this. There we go. And apparently Chris claimed he used his category for this. In Sonichu issue 1, Black Sonichu is supposed to spin dash at 200 rotations per minute, which is supposed to mean that he does it at high speeds. This actually roughly translates to 3 per second. Yeah, and it's... If I think realistically, I think Chris wanted to be something more closer to roughly about 20,000 rotations per minute. That would be slightly more believable, considering what the weight, the size, and everything to convey the idea that Black Sonichu is capable of doing what he can do. Chris claims that that his calls from Central Virginia Regional Jail are limited to 10 minutes. Recordings of full calls, however, show that the actual limit is 15 minutes. Whether or not Chris was a very special exception, I have no idea. Algebra. Planet Dolan artist Viv Homeless made a post joking about how butts are greater than water, written as butts greater than water, to which Chris misunderstood as taking the greater than symbol, meaning that one, to mean less than or the other one. Water is more important than butts. Considering the post was made by a porn artist, and one which Chris follows no less, it is more than shocking to see that he couldn't have made this connection. 2 days later, after the post was made, Chris made another response to 2D animator Spinal Palm, in which he says that salted butter is better than unsalted butter, written as salted butter is, less than unsalted butter. This time around, Chris actually understood the underlying message and agreed with Spinal Palm about the topic. Great. Meaning that he must figure out the meaning of the greater than symbol after several other users corrected him. Geometry. In one of his tirades towards the Xbox, Chris said that the angle of half a circle was 120, then revised his claim to 130. And still got it wrong. It's 180. Number systems. Chris reports of how much Cherokee blood he has is being inconsistent. When he emailed Jackie, he stated he was 1/16th Cherokee, but he later told Regina that he was 1/32 Cherokee. Finally, when talking to Emily, he claimed Bob was at least 1/4 Cherokee, which would make of Chris at least 1/8 Cherokee, not 1/16th or 1/32, because who cares at that point, really? To avoid assigning an unlucky number to his Nightstar comic, Chris decided to number the comic as Sonichu 12-9 using an M- in place of a decimal point. This could make sense if it is referred to the 9th part of an issue, but Chris clearly intends it to be a fictional amount of almost 13. Because Chris is a friggin' idiot, I suppose. And finally, statistics and probability. Chris coined the term infinitely high boyfriend factor, the probability that a woman he is trying to latch onto isn't single, in which he claims that he doesn't hate only 1/4 billionth of all males. Well, points for consistency, I suppose, but again, points are for irrationale, because we know that's what Chris can do, and probably has done for, well over 30 years at this point, but that's just sort of how that is. You can't teach an old dog new tricks or tell him that his methods are complete BS. So that, ladies and gentlemen, was the conclusion to Chris and his relations to the world of science. To the world of science, they'll probably look upon Chris as a subject of great mystery as to how he could come to make such decisions as he could, something that would even trump psychologists the world over, as well as many Christorians from previous experience from like Sachumo and Gino Samuel, even including Gibby as well, and years to come to probably myself, Smokey MC, and plenty of other Christorians who were blessed with the fortune of not finding out who this man is, and what he has become. So, there's that. So, with all that being said and done, ladies and gentlemen, I hope all of you have managed to learn something a bit more useful than anything that Chris could come up with, and I look forward to seeing all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now.